Okay, so as usual, we'll start with some meditation. I thought we could do another meditation on the nature of the mind, the clear nature of the mind. This is something that Lama Yeshe would often teach us in the early days when he was teaching at Kopan Monastery. And we'll start with a few minutes of settling our mind and our body to be as comfortable as we can and as present as we can. And then we'll do a few recitations of the mantra of the Buddha, Shakyamuni Buddha, and then go into the actual meditation. So first, check your posture. It's good when meditating if you can sit up straight, if that isn't too painful for you. It just helps the mind to be more awake and alert. But although we keep our back straight, we shouldn't be tight and tense. Okay, so let your shoulders relax, let your neck relax, let your head tilt downwards just a little bit. Have your mouth and jaw relaxed, not clenched tight. And if it's easier for you, you can close your eyes, but the Tibetan teachers recommend leaving the eyes open a little bit so that there's some light coming in, and that can help us to stay awake and alert. This time of the night, you might be tired and it's easy to fall asleep when you close your eyes and relax. So we do want to stay awake when we're meditating. So that's one way to help ourselves stay awake, is keeping the eyes open a little and just have your gaze looking down onto whatever's in front of you, your table or your lap. If that's too uncomfortable, too difficult, it is okay to close your eyes, but just try to notice. If you are starting to feel sleepy, nodding off, then to wake yourself up, you can open your eyes a little. And a good way to relax is to take a couple of deep breaths. So you breathe in slowly through both nostrils, slowly and deeply. Pause for a moment, hold the breath for just a moment, and then let the breath go out slowly through your mouth. And repeat that 2 more times. Breathing in slowly through your nostrils, holding for a moment, and then let the breath go out through your mouth. And then after 3 breaths like that, and just resume normal breathing. And by paying attention to the breath flowing in and flowing out, that's a good way to settle our mind in the present, because our breath is happening in the present. So when we're watching our breath, then naturally our mind is in the present. But while doing that, thoughts may pop up, or memories from things you did during the day today. Maybe there's still some emotions, some stress about things that happened. So try to not get caught up in those. Put them aside. You can always think about them again later. But really try to give yourself a break from our usual busy thoughts. And the same with thoughts of the future, what you're going to do tonight, tomorrow, and so on. So if those thoughts come up, again, put them aside and just keep bringing your awareness, your attention back to the breath. Each time it gets distracted, it wanders away to something else. Counting the breaths is helpful. You can count up to 5 breaths or up to 10 breaths as you wish, starting again at 1 whenever you reach 5 or 10. So that gives your mind a little bit more to do and making it less likely that it will wander away. Okay, now let's take a few more moments to think about why we're here and see if we can bring up a really good motivation that is considering not just our own happiness, but the happiness, the benefit of others. I'm sure we all feel that way sometimes. The wish to bring happiness, peace, well-being, and freedom from suffering to other people, to other beings, to the world. I try to feel how nice that would be if we could make a contribution to that. then connect that with what we're doing here. We're learning about the mind with the purpose of working on the mind, bringing about a positive transformation, decreasing aspects of the mind that are disturbing, painful, problematic, and increasing aspects of the mind that are positive, constructive, beneficial. And this is good for ourselves as well as for others and for the world. I really try to feel that that is your reason, your motivation for being here, participating in this session. It's to benefit yourself, others, and the world as much as possible. So we don't need the slides right now. We're going to do meditation first. So now visualize in the space in front of you the Buddha. If it's difficult to visualize, then you can just feel the presence of the Buddha there in front of you. So the Buddha has so many excellent qualities: wisdom, understanding the true nature of all things, compassion and love for all beings throughout the universe, infinite patience, generosity, and all other excellent qualities. So he's someone we can rely on, someone we can trust, someone who can help us and guide us. So try to feel that way. Even if you're not 100% sure if you can accept everything that the Buddha taught, but hopefully there's at least some of the things that he taught and some of the practices he explained that you do find beneficial. So you feel, yeah, it seems like maybe Buddha is someone I can rely on. And Buddha from his side is completely ready to help us every minute, every second. So if you can, if you feel comfortable to do so, imagine light flowing from the Buddha, like rays of light, streams of light flowing from the Buddha into you, filling you completely from head to toe. And it clears away any kind of problematic energy like sickness, pain, negative attitudes, negative karma, all your problems, all your suffering. Imagine those just disappearing, vanishing in space. And you get filled with a lot of positive energy. The Buddha's realizations and good qualities pouring into you, blessing your mind so that you can develop those same qualities in your mind. So imagine that happening while we recite the mantra 3 times. Ayata Om Mune Mune Maha Mune Soha. Ayata Om Mune Mune Maha Mune Soha. Ayata Om Mune Mune Maha Mune Soha. Now we're going to do a meditation to see if we can get in touch with or recognize the clear and knowing nature of our mind. So go back to focusing on the breathing. Do that for a few more minutes, really trying to settle your mind in the present, the here and now. Not letting your mind wander away to the past, the future, other places, other things. Just letting your mind be free of all those other thoughts so that you can be fully attentive to what we are doing in this meditation. So we have been watching our breathing, paying attention to sensations in our body as our breath is flowing in and flowing out. Now see if you can turn your attention inward to that which knows, that which experiences. Now, this is not easy to do, so don't get frustrated if you're not able to do it. But remember what was explained before as what the mind is. The mind is clarity, meaning it's not physical, doesn't have any physical properties like color, shape, size, not made of atoms, any kind of material particles. So it's completely non-physical. And it is that which knows, which experiences things, which is aware. Let's see if you can notice that. See if you can notice just awareness itself rather than paying attention to the objects of our awareness, like sounds, sensations in our body, thoughts, memories. If you can just notice awareness itself, that which is clear and knowing. The nature of our mind is sometimes compared to the sky or space because just as the sky or space is not something solid, it's just like open and vast and spacious. It allows things to move, come and go within it without being affected by the things that come and go, like always there. So you might find it helpful to think of the sky, think of space. For example, when the sky is completely clear without any clouds or pollution or birds, airplanes flying through it, just that vast spaciousness. So getting a kind of mental image, mental picture of that might help you understand the nature of the mind. But don't, usually the sky is blue. So don't think of the blue color of the sky, because our mind isn't blue, but rather it's the spaciousness, the non-obstructiveness of the sky that is similar to our mind, the nature of our mind. So it's natural that thoughts and distractions will occur. That's normal. But we can think of them as being like clouds or birds or airplanes that pass through the sky. They come and they go, they disappear without doing anything to disturb or damage the sky. The spacious nature of the sky is still there, always there. So in a similar way, thoughts, memories, emotions, mental pictures, and so on come up in our mind. But these are not permanent parts of the mind. They come and they go. You can observe them, notice them, let them go, and go back to focusing on the spacious, clear nature of the mind. I didn't want to make this meditation too long because I have some material I want to cover tonight, but feel free to do this practice on your own when you have time. And if you have my book, How to Meditate, in there, this meditation is found in there. You can read that and follow it along with it. And remember some years ago, a woman that I know who's a therapist, I met her long ago in Nepal, and she works as a therapist. And she wrote to me out of the blue and told me a story about one of her patients that she was trying to help. I don't think she explained, what was going on with this person. I guess the person had a lot of emotional problems, psychological problems, and the therapist recommended this meditation. And so the patient tried the meditation and found it incredibly helpful. It gave her a lot of relief from her mental suffering. So yeah, this friend was very happy and wanted to write to me and thank me and say, yeah, well, anyway, we have to thank Lama Yeshe. It was Lama Yeshe who, taught us this meditation, but it's from the Tibetan tradition. Yeah, it's kind of a common meditation in Tibetan Buddhism. So yeah, feel free to try it again on your own. It can be very helpful, especially when you are feeling stressed or any kind of, disturbance in your mind. Nice to give yourself a break and just remember what the mind is. What is the nature of the mind? And help you not take the disturbing thoughts and emotions so seriously. Okay, so now let's continue. Now we can have the slides up on the screen. So last week, I started talking about one way of dividing the mind into what are called main minds and mental factors. So we started talking about that. I will continue tonight and give more information about it. And no, could we go back? Yeah. And so this slide shows some of the main points, kind of like review of what we covered last week. So the first bullet point says, each instance of our awareness is comprised of a main mind and several mental factors. So remember, as explained before, that our mind is not just one thing. It's always the same, but is rather like a stream or a series of individual moments of experience, mental events. And each of these arises and immediately is gone to be replaced by the next one, and that arises. So it's a little bit like bubbles coming up and popping. Okay. And so our mind then is actually consists of many, many individual moments or instances of mind, of this clear knowing nature. And so if we were to isolate one single mental event, one single moment of mind, then it consists of parts. It's made up of parts. And there's one main mind. I'll explain what those are later. And several mental factors. So these have different functions. The main mind experiences the object in a general way. It knows the mere entity or presence of the object. So, for example, when we have the experience of seeing, then the main mind is simply aware of whatever it is we are looking at, like a flower or a car or whatever. It doesn't sort of give names or labels. It just knows there is this visual object there that we are experiencing. Then the mental factors, there's many different mental factors, and each mental factor has a different role to play in our experience. So the mental factors experience the object in more specialized ways. They apprehend attributes of the object, different attributes, different characteristics of the object. or they perform specific functions. So just to give an example, when we look at a flower, so what's happening there is there's an eye consciousness, what's called eye consciousness or visual consciousness, and that's a main mind. And that eye consciousness is simply aware of this, the presence, the entity, the general overall existence of the flower, but it doesn't label it. That's a flower, that's a rose, that's red, nothing like that. Just very, very simple and basic awareness of the object. And then together with that main mind, kind of like together in one package, there are a number of mental factors. And each of these mental factors will kind of deal with the flower in a different way. So for example, one mental factor that's always there, that's present in every moment of mind, is feeling. So feeling isn't the same as emotion in Buddhism. Feeling is something very basic, very kind of like our initial reaction to an object that we experience. And there's just three types of feelings: pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. So one of those three types of feelings accompanies every single moment of our experience. So when looking at a flower, probably most people have a pleasant feeling. People usually like flowers. But it's possible some people may have an unpleasant feeling. Maybe they have allergies. So, they see a flower and they think, oh no, this is going to trigger my allergies and I'm going to be sneezing and coughing. And some people may have an unpleasant feeling. And others may just have a neutral feeling. Maybe their mind is preoccupied with something else, and they're not really paying much attention to what they're experiencing. So they just notice the flower, but neither have a pleasant nor an unpleasant feeling. So anyway, feeling is one of the mental factors. And so it's experiencing the object in the sense of, finding it pleasant or unpleasant, or neither. And another mental factor is called discrimination. That's also one that comes every moment with every experience. And the function of discrimination is to be able to differentiate the characteristics of an object so that we can tell it from something else. So when we see a flower, we're able to know that that is a flower and not, a skunk, not a barbecue. Okay. So discrimination is responsible for differentiating one object from another. So it notices particular characteristics of an object that make that object different from other objects so that we can identify it. And so those are just a couple of the mental factors that will accompany that experience. And so each has their own function. Okay, then last bullet point says, and it's an analogy. This is just a rough analogy. The main mind is a little bit like a prime minister, and the mental factors are like cabinet ministers who assist the prime minister. So I use that example rather than president, because I think we have different terms I don't know what we call them. We have like the president, and we have the secretary of state and the secretary of transportation and so on. So it's a little bit different language. But anyway, there's one person who's kind of the boss in charge, but doesn't have to do all the work themselves, because they have these other people who help them. And each of these people, like the ministers, have their own job to do. Each one is taking care of a specific aspect of the government. And then they all work together in order, just as a prime minister and the cabinet ministers work together to run the country, around the government, main mind and mental factors work together to experience the object in a relatively complete way. So the reason I wrote relatively complete way is because when we have, sometimes we might experience something, we might perceive something that we're not really sure what it is. Like, when we're outside and, it's starting to get dark, or it's early in the morning and it's still dark, then we can only see things that are, in a very vague way. There isn't much light. So we can see kind of vague shapes, but not really sure what they are. We're still having the experience of seeing things. We're still having eye consciousness, seeing things, but not so complete, because we're not yet sure what those things are until we have more light. Then we'll be able to see them completely. So some of our experiences are not 100% perfect, complete, seeing things very, very clearly, completely. But yeah, we do still have an experience of an object. We do perceive an object. We do know an object, but in a more or less complete way. And so the knowing of an object, the experiencing of an object, happens because of this combination of main minds and mental factors that work together. And we're not going to go into much detail with this topic of main minds and mental factors, but this is something studied in a course, a subject called Lorik, and that's the Tibetan term, and it means mind and awareness. And that course is usually taught in the basic program. You probably have opportunities at your center to study that. Really goes into a lot of detail with all the different mental factors and how they work together and so on. But when you study Lorik, you find out that a main mind and the mental factors that are together with it in the same package have certain things in common. For example, they all perceive the same object. They're all focused on the same object. You would never have the main mind is looking at one object and then the mental factors are looking at something else. That never happens. They're all focused on the same object. They also occur simultaneously. Yeah, again, like in one package, they all happen at the same time. And also, it's said that their cognitive nature is always the same. For example, we looked earlier at how some of our experiences are correct and some of them are wrong or mistaken. And so again, if a moment of mind is correct, then the main mind and all the mental factors would be correct. But if it's wrong, then all of them are wrong. So they're all either correct or wrong. So those are just some of the things that they have in common. There's actually 5 of these points. They're called 5 similarities that a main mind and mental factors have in common. Okay, so next slide is looking at the main minds. So there's 6 types of main minds. These are often called the 6 consciousnesses. So right up at the top is mind or consciousness. And that is what we've been looking at so far. That which is clear and knowing, clear and aware. And then the first division of mind is into sense consciousness and mental consciousness. So sense consciousness, these are the minds, the experiences that we have related to our 5 senses. So we have down at the bottom those 5 senses. So eye consciousness. So, for example, seeing a flower, seeing a computer screen, seeing our friend, Okay, so all day long, when we have our eyes open, we are seeing many, many different things. So that all those experiences are our eye consciousness. Then ear consciousness, that is hearing. So right now I'm talking and you're hearing the sound of my voice. There may be other sounds as well in the room where you are, maybe traffic outside, maybe somebody's playing music or somebody's talking in the background. So those experiences are the ear consciousness or hearing. Nose consciousness, that's when we smell odors, incense, garbage, somebody's cooking something, bread or hot dogs or whatever. Okay, so those experiences of smelling odors, that's our nose consciousness. Then taste consciousness or tongue consciousness, when we're eating, then we have something in our mouth, then we taste that. It could be sweet or salty or spicy or whatever, vanilla. Nowadays, there's so many different kinds of flavors that many of them artificial. They find ways in laboratories to make things that taste just like vanilla or just like strawberry. Even if you don't have an actual strawberry, you can still have that taste. Okay, so all those different kinds of tastes, when we have those experiences, that is our tongue consciousness. Then body consciousness, the fifth one. So that includes all of our bodily perceptions. So right now you're probably sitting on a chair, so you can feel, the contact of your body, your back, your legs, your buttocks against the chair. Or maybe you're touching things with your hands, so you feel those. And maybe internally, you may have different sensations. You might feel pain somewhere or pleasant somewhere. You might feel hot or cold, hungry, thirsty, and so on. So those are all examples of body consciousness. So it's our mind, our body or tactile consciousness that is having those experiences. And so those are the first 5 types of consciousness, and they're all called sense consciousnesses because they are related to physical senses, like our eyes, our ears, and so forth. And then the 6th consciousness is the mental consciousness, which is varied in many different types of mental consciousness. Here we have all of our thoughts. So when we're thinking about things, also memories, when we remember things from the past, or fantasies, when our mind is just creating stories, movies. Also emotions, all of our emotions, both negative emotions like anger, frustration, anxiety, as well as positive ones like joy and love and compassion. So all the very different kinds of emotions, these are all part of the mental consciousness. And dreams, when we sleep at night and have dreams, those are also part of our mental consciousness. The computer's just starting to make some noise. Maybe it's overheated. Okay, so those are our 6 consciousnesses, six types of consciousness. And so those are the main minds. So those, every moment of our experience, it consists of one of those 6 plus some mental factors. And one question, there's one sort of controversy among different Buddhists, is can we have more than one of these 6 types of consciousness at the same time? So Lama Tsongkhapa says yes. I think we can have all 5 of the sense consciousnesses at the same time. And I think we can also have a mental consciousness. And I remember attending teachings by Geshe Zopa, who lived in Wisconsin. And he gave an example. He said, let's say you go to a movie theater. I don't know if people still go to movie theaters anymore, but in the old days, we used to go to a movie theater. And so we sit down and we're watching the movie on the screen. So we have eye consciousness. We're hearing the sounds of the voices, the music, and so on. We have ear consciousness. And let's say we're eating popcorn. Yeah. And so we can probably both smell and taste the popcorn. Got a lot of butter in it and, nice salty taste. And then body consciousness. He says, if you're with your friend, your sweetheart, and maybe you're, got your arm around her or him, or, just snuggling up to them. Or even if you're sitting there by yourself, you feel the seat, it may be very soft and comfortable, or maybe really hard and uncomfortable, but you have body consciousness. So he said, yeah, we can have all 5 of those at the same time. And I think you can have mental consciousness as well, because we're probably thinking about the movie and maybe reacting emotionally with fear or sadness or excitement or joy, whatever. So that would be the mental consciousness. But there are some Buddhists, like in the Theravada tradition, the Pali tradition, I've heard that they don't agree. They say that there can only be one of these at any given moment, but they happen so fast. Yeah, they may seem simultaneous, but they're actually not. They're actually sequential, but they're just really, really fast. So I don't know. I'm not in any position to be able to say that. Maybe one day when we develop our minds and we can be super attentive to whatever is happening in our mind, then we might be able to notice if these are simultaneous or sequential. But anyway, that's just kind of a side. Okay, then the next slide gives a list of mental factors, but not all of them, just the main categories. So there's actually many, many mental factors, but in our tradition, we mainly focus on 51 mental factors. And other Buddhist traditions or schools of tenets might have others that they focus on. For example, in the Theravada tradition, they have 52 mental factors. In the Vaibhashika school, they have 46. So it's mainly like each school or each tradition decides which mental factors are most important and need to be focused on. So this list of 51 is not exhaustive. It doesn't cover every single mental factor there is, but these are said to be the main ones. And they're divided into these different categories. And so I'll just go through and explain a little bit about them. And there's also an example of for each category. So the first one is they're called omnipresent or ever-present mental factors. There are 5 of these, and they are called omnipresent because they occur with every single moment or instance of mind. And feeling is one of those. I already explained that with the example of the flower. So every time we see something or hear a sound or smell an odor or taste something with our tongue consciousness or feel a sensation with our body consciousness or have a mental consciousness, thinking, remembering, fantasizing, whatever. So with every one of those experiences, there's always a feeling. And there are only 3 types of feelings: pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral. And this is a very important mental factor. You probably heard it's actually one of the aggregates, one of the 5 aggregates is a feeling. And the reason that it's mentioned as one of the 5 aggregates is because it plays a very important role in our experiences within samsara, being in samsara, being unenlightened. So the reason is that for normal, ordinary beings, unenlightened beings, when we have a pleasant feeling with regard to an object, it usually leads to attachment. So after having a pleasant feeling, when we see something or hear something, then within a short time, our mind develops attachment, desire, clinging for that object. And desire, attachment is one of the main factors that keeps us in samsara. It's one of the main afflictions that keeps us stuck in samsara. And so if we didn't have pleasant feelings with regard to certain objects, we wouldn't get attached to them. We wouldn't have attachment to them. So a big part of practice in among those who are really seriously practicing Buddhism with the aim of attaining enlightenment or nirvana, a big part of the practice is to pay attention to our feelings and try not to let them lead to afflictions. We can't stop having feelings. It's impossible. Even the Buddha has feelings. But what we can do, what we try to do is not let this process go where we have a pleasant feeling and then attachment to that object. So there's nothing wrong with having pleasant feelings, eating ice cream, for example, or whatever is your favorite food, and having a pleasant feeling with that. That's completely okay. Nothing wrong with that. The problem is developing attachment, clinging, craving. I want more. I want better. I want this again and again and again. So then our mind gets stuck, glued to that object, and that can lead to kinds of problems. Then when we have an unpleasant feeling with an object, that usually leads to aversion, and there are different degrees of aversion. It starts off as just dislike, but it can grow stronger and turn into hatred, anger, and even aggressiveness, violence, wanting to, do something violent to the person or the object that you have the unpleasant feeling about. And so, again, it's just normal, understandable that we have unpleasant feelings, but as a practitioner, we try to watch our mind and not let the development of aversion, anger, and hatred to take place. We just have the unpleasant feeling and then let it go. And the third type of feeling is called, sometimes it's translated as neutral, or it's just neither pleasant nor unpleasant, but something in between those two. And that's a little more subtle, hard to recognize. But it's said that with that type of feeling, with neutral feelings, what usually happens with ordinary beings is they just continue to be ignorant about the object. They see the object in mistaken ways, like it's permanent, it's inherently existing, and they don't do anything to overcome those wrong views. They just continue seeing the object in these mistaken ways. So it said that neutral feeling tends to perpetuate ignorance. So one interesting point is, why do we have the feelings that we do have? Because you've probably noticed that not everybody feels the same way. with a certain type of food, for example. Maybe it's a type of food you like, so you have a pleasant feeling when you eat that food, but somebody else will say, oh, I don't like that, they don't want to taste it at all. For them, it's unpleasant. And the same with everything else. Any of our anything that we see, hear, smell, taste, and so on. Yeah, different people react differently. So there's the tendency, we have the tendency to think that the object is pleasant from its own side. We have a pleasant feeling about ice cream, for example. We think ice cream is wonderful, is fantastic, is just, it just makes me happy. It makes me feel good. So it's like the pleasant feeling is coming from that object. That's how it seems. But if that was really true, then everybody who experiences that object would have the same feeling. And that is never the case. Just to give an example, I used this a couple of weeks ago when I was teaching. I was using the example of a loud ticking clock. I use that example because that is something I can't stand. Where there's, those clocks that go tick, 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 especially in a place where you're trying to meditate. I don't know why, but some places they have a meditation hall, a meditation room, and they have this clock on the wall that's ticking really loud. It drives me crazy. So I asked the people in the class, how many of you can't stand the sound of a loud ticking clock? And a bunch of people put up their hands. And then I asked, how many people don't mind? And about the same number of people put up their hands. Yeah. So, yeah, so it's always like that. Yeah. Whatever we either like, we have a good feeling about, or we dislike, we have a bad feeling about. There's always other people who have just the opposite feeling. So why is that? What accounts for that? It's not the object that's making us feel that way. According to Buddhism, it's said to be our karma. One of the ways that karma ripens is in the feelings that we have. So when we have a pleasant feeling, that's the ripening of good karma. Yeah, we have pleasant feelings because we created good karma in the past. Unpleasant feelings, those are the ripening of bad karma, negative karma we created in the past. But I once asked a Geshe if that's really the only cause for feelings. And we had a discussion about it. And they said, yeah, there are other factors as well. Because, for example, conditioning or experiences during our life, if you have a bad experience with a certain object when you're a child, then every time you see that object or encounter that object, you'll have a bad feeling about it. Okay. So I think, yeah, experiences we have in this life will also affect what kinds of feelings we have. But anyway, I think this is actually one very helpful strategy to use when we do have either a pleasant feeling or an unpleasant feeling, just to remind ourselves that not everybody feels the same way that we do, and it's not the object. Right? It's not the object that's making us feel that way, but it's rather internal causes and conditions that we feel the way that we do. And so that can really help us to not take things so seriously, yeah, and develop more equanimity, have greater equanimity, so that we're not so strongly attracted to certain objects and averse to other objects. Okay, so then the second group are called object ascertaining mental factors, and there are 5 of these. One example is mindfulness, the famous mindfulness. And the reason they're called this object ascertaining is because they apprehend the individual features of an object. Okay. And so mindfulness, the real meaning of mindfulness is a mental factor. And it's explained as remembering or keeping in mind something familiar such that we don't forget it. And this is really important in meditation, because when we are practicing meditation, we always have something that we're meditating on. It could be the breath, it could be an image of the Buddha, it could be like the Four Noble Truths or emptiness that we're trying to understand. So mindfulness enables our mind to stay focused on that object and not wander away, not forget it, not lose it. So mindfulness kind of holds our mind to the object. So yeah, it prevents our mind being distracted, enables us to develop concentration. But it's also important in our daily life. For example, we all have responsibilities that we need to take care of. If you have a job, you're supposed to show up at a certain time and do certain tasks. And so mindfulness enables us to remember what we're supposed to do, where we're supposed to be, when we're supposed to be there, what we're supposed to do, and so on. So that's important with our job, or if you're a parent, you have to remember, you have to keep in mind, where your child needs to go at such and such time, where they need to be picked up, and so on. Yeah. So mindfulness enables us to remember our responsibilities, our appointments, and so on. Okay, then the next group are called virtuous mental factors. And there are 11 of those. One example is faith. And they also include non-attachment, which is the opposite of attachment, and compassion, which is the opposite of cruelty. And they don't actually have one that's called love, but there's one, what is it called? Non-anger, I think, something like non-hatred. And so that's the opposite of hatred, and that's the meaning of love. So each of the virtuous mental factors is the opposite to an affliction, to one of the afflictive mental factors, which are the cause of our suffering and problems. And faith. So faith is usually the first one of the 11 that is listed. Faith is having confidence in such things as karma, the law of cause and effect, and the three jewels, Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, and the possibility of attaining enlightenment. So having confidence in these objects is necessary so that we will want to learn more about them and practice what we need to do in order to achieve things like happiness in the future and higher states like liberation and enlightenment. And so the meaning of virtuous, what is the criteria for something being virtuous? It's the cause of happiness. So virtue, or a virtuous mental factor, is that which leads to happiness. So these 11 mental factors are said to be natural virtues, meaning just by their nature, they bring happiness. When any of these virtuous mental factors pops up in our mind, when it's present in our mind, then our mind is in a good state. It's happy, it's calm, it's peaceful. So they naturally bring happiness in an immediate sense, but also they motivate our actions so that we do things that are virtuous and will bring further happiness in the future. Okay. So these are the things we want to have more of. And yeah, I'll talk a little bit in future classes about how we can have more virtuous, positive mental factors. Then the next group are the root afflictions. There are 6 root afflictions. One example is anger. And the meaning of affliction, sometimes translated as delusion in Sanskrit, the term is klesha. So these are mental factors that disturb the mind. When they are present, our mind is disturbed, unpeaceful, and they are the main cause of being in samsara, in cyclic existence, rather than attaining liberation and enlightenment. So all being in samsara and all the different problems and sufferings we have in samsara are mainly due to these 6 root afflictions. And so it's really important to learn about these and be able to recognize them when they arise in our mind, and then learn how to counteract them. So it's, counteracting afflictions is a little bit like learning how to respond appropriately when a fire breaks out. So especially nowadays, especially on the West Coast, Southwest as well, there's so many fires that break out, and they can cause tremendous damage, loss of life, and so on. And so it's really important, if we're living in these kind of areas, to really be careful and not create the causes and conditions for a fire to break out in the first place, and then know what to do if a fire does break out. How do we, take action to stop it so that it doesn't spread further? So it's kind of similar with working with our mind, working with our afflictions. We need to learn how to manage our mind so that these afflictions don't arise in the first place, but even when they do arise, we know how to manage them so they don't spread and cause too much damage. Then the next group are secondary afflictions, and there are 20 of those. So these are also afflictions. They disturb our mind. They lead to suffering and problems. And they are related to the root afflictions, especially the 3 main ones of attachment, anger, and ignorance. So the secondary afflictions are kind of branches of the root afflictions. They arise due to the root afflictions. So one example is jealousy. So jealousy, the main cause of jealousy is attachment. We have attachment to either a person or some object or some quality. So there's something we have attachment to. And then we see somebody else who has that and we don't, or they have more than we do or better than we do. And then we feel jealous. So jealousy is actually kind of a hatred, a feeling of hatred. I can't stand it. I can't bear it that person has what I don't have, or they have more or better than I have. So it's kind of a combination of attachment plus hatred. So it's particularly painful, disturbing. So again, it's good to learn about these afflictions so we can recognize them and learn how to deal with them, how to manage them. And the last group are called changeable mental factors, and there are 4 of these. And the reason they're called changeable is because in themselves, on their own, they are neither virtuous nor non-virtuous, but they can become virtuous or non-virtuous depending on other circumstances, mainly other mental factors. So one example of these is regret. And so it could be non-virtuous. If we do something good, like maybe we give a donation, we give a lot of money we feel, this sudden burst of generosity, and we give, sign a check for $1,000 or something to some charity. And then later on, we feel regret. We think, oh, why did I give so much? I didn't have to give that much, So we regret doing something good, something positive, something virtuous. So that regret is actually non-virtuous. It's not good to regret things that we have done that are actually good things. But in other cases, like if we do something non-virtuous, if we tell a lie, or we hurt somebody, we say nasty words to them and hurt their feelings, and then afterwards we regret what we did, that is virtuous, that is positive. Okay, so it's good to regret misdeeds, non-virtuous actions, but not good to regret virtuous things that we've done. Okay, so the next slide, this is now a little bit more about mental factors and how they affect the state of mind. And it's kind of related to a question that came up at the end of the class. I think it was William who asked this question, something about how, if our main mind's neutral. And yes, my understanding is on their own, just on their own, a main mind is always neutral, neither virtuous nor non-virtuous. But on the left-hand side, this is an example of a non-virtuous mental state. So this circle shows a main mind, and then going clockwise, we have feeling, discrimination, contact, intention, and attention. Those are the 5 omnipresent mental factors. Those 5 mental factors are present in every moment of mind. Then there's anger. I put anger in red because it's fiery when anger comes up in our mind, and we feel inflamed with anger. So when anger is present in the mind, and again, it would be together with a main mind and the 5 omnipresent mental factors, there could be other mental factors as well, but the presence of anger in that mind makes that whole mind non-virtuous, because anger is a non-virtuous mental factor. And so, it's a little bit like if you have a glass of water, it's clear, colorless water, but you put a drop of red food coloring into the water and you stir it around, then, the whole glass of water turns red. Yeah. So a non-virtuous mental factor like anger, when that is present in the mind, it's like adding that drop of food coloring, so the whole mind becomes colored in a negative way, in a non-virtuous way. But the same thing happens with virtuous mental states. So on the right side, it's the same group. This would be a different state of mind, but here's one state of mind consisting of a main mind, and then the 5 ever-present mental factors plus faith. And I made faith blue because the virtuous mental factors kind of have the effect of cooling the mind. The afflictions like anger and attachment and jealousy and so on, they kind of make the mind really agitated, stirred up, not at all cool and calm. Whereas the virtuous mental factors kind of cool down the mind. They make it very nice, calm, clear, cool, and virtuous. So if faith, that mental factor, is present, in this package of main mind and other mental factors, then that whole mind becomes a virtuous state of mind. Yeah, yeah, all the mental factors are important. They all have a role to play. But, when it comes to our Dharma practice, our spiritual practice, we need to pay particular attention to afflictions like anger, attachment, jealousy, and so on, because, if they pop up in our mind, then, that whole state of mind becomes non-virtuous and also very unpeaceful, disturbed, agitated. And so we want to try to have less of those states of mind, and then the virtuous mental factors like faith and non-attachment, compassion, and so on. So when they are present in mind, then our whole mind becomes positive and virtuous and beneficial. Okay, so maybe I'll just stop there and leave you time to ask questions if anyone has a question you'd like to ask. Cynthia.
Hi, good evening, Venerable Catch. So I'm just wondering, with all the different mental states, is it a correct understanding if I were to say, in the way we're training our minds to be more aware, so there's the different factors like mindfulness and awareness, so that when we attend our Dharma classes, trying to develop that we're able to neutralize, for lack of a better word, neutralize the other mental factors such as anger. Would that be a correct way to look at it?
Yeah. The way, so mindfulness is a very important mental factor in our meditation practice. It has different roles to play. Like I mentioned, one role of mindfulness is to not forget our object of meditation. So if we sit down and we decide to meditate on the breath, or we meditate on the Buddha or whatever, then we need to stick to that and not, let our mind go all over the place. So mindfulness is the mental factor that enables us to remember what we're supposed to be meditating on, keep it in mind, so that we can then develop, the good qualities of that meditation practice. And there's different ways that mindfulness is explained in the sort of popular contemporary culture. Mindfulness is explained as being aware of what is happening moment by moment. And strictly speaking, that's actually the role or function of another mental factor, which is called introspective awareness or vigilance. And so the way they work together is mindfulness, keeps our mind focused on our object, like our breathing. Then vigilance or introspective awareness accompanies mindfulness, and it notices if our mind is doing what it's supposed to do or not. And it notices if, for example, anger pops up, or attachment pops up, or some other disturbing, afflicted state of mind pops up. So it's actually introspective alertness that notices that, and then we're able to apply an antidote rather than just letting our mind get completely carried away with that affliction. So they kind of work together. But I think in some traditions, they combine those two into one and just call it mindfulness. And they say it's mindfulness that enables us to recognize what is happening in our mind. So it's can be a little confusing, but anyway, whatever you call it, whether you call it mindfulness or introspective alertness, the important thing is, when we're we're trying to train our mind, we do want to notice what's happening in our mind. And if there is an afflictive state like anger, attachment, jealousy, and so on, to not just let the mind run with that and go with that and get caught up in that, but do something different. So yeah, does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Jennifer?
Yeah. Hello though. I have a question. Was the meditation that we did at the beginning, is that a Mahamudra meditation that you were doing, or is that something else?
Well, there's different kinds of Mahamudra. And I think that like I say, it was Lama Yeshe who taught us this meditation, in the Kopan meditation courses, and it just became kind of a standard meditation used in FPMT centers and courses and so on. And I think the origin of it is Mahamudra, yes, but it's kind of a simplified version of Mahamudra, just to help us, get in touch with our mind and understand the nature of our mind. But the full meaning of Mahamudra, the full practice of Mahamudra, is much more than that.
Much more than that. Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Anyone else? There's actually something else I was going to talk about, but kind of skipped over it, but maybe I can go back. I don't know if you can put the slides back up on the screen and go to the second to the last one. No, the previous one. Yeah, that one. Okay, so the third group is called virtuous mental factors. And then you might think, but aren't there non-virtuous mental factors? There don't seem to be any non-virtuous mental factors. Instead, we have afflictions, 6 root afflictions, 20 secondary afflictions. And this is a little complicated, and I don't know if it's really important to you or not, but I think some people believe that afflictions are always non-virtuous, like they're the opposite to the virtuous one. So they're always non-virtuous. But that isn't completely correct. Most of the afflictions are non-virtuous, but not all of them. For example, ignorance. So ignorance is one of the root afflictions. And you've probably heard a lot about ignorance before. They say that ignorance is the very root of all our suffering. And there's actually different kinds of ignorance. Not all ignorance is the same, but the main type of ignorance they talk about in our tradition is ignorance that believes in things to be inherently existing, like there's an inherently existing I, and also everyone else and everything else is also inherently existing. So that's a type of ignorance, and that's said to be the very root of all our suffering and our problems. However, that type of ignorance is not necessarily non-virtuous. For example, when we learn about Dharma and we want to practice the Dharma, and we start doing meditation, and we start doing prostrations and reciting mantras and doing all kinds of Dharma activities. And those are virtuous. Okay, those are good things to do, good deeds, virtuous things. However, our mind is still under the control of ignorance. Yeah, we don't stop having ignorance for a long time. Yeah, it actually takes a long time to get rid of. And so even while we're doing our prostrations and our meditations and our other virtuous actions, our mind is still influenced by ignorance. It believes there's a real inherently existing I who is meditating. There's a real inherently existing object of meditation, and so on and so forth. There's a real inherently existing enlightenment that I'm trying to achieve. So even though we're doing virtuous things, good things, but ignorance is there, affecting our mind, influencing our mind. And in that case, when we're doing virtuous things, ignorance is not non-virtuous. It's not virtuous. Ignorance will never be virtuous, but it isn't always non-virtuous, because it does sometimes motivate us to do virtuous actions. But it also motivates us to do non-virtuous actions. So when we do non-virtuous things, we lie, we steal, and so on and so forth. So yeah, their ignorance is also motivating us to do those things. And then it's non-virtuous when we're doing something non-virtuous. So I don't know if this makes any sense to you or not. And if you do have questions about it, we can bring it up again next time. But the point I'm trying to make is that when it comes to the afflictions, the reason that they're called afflictions rather than non-virtuous mental factors is because not all of them are always non-virtuous. Anger is always non-virtuous. Whenever that comes up in our mind, it doesn't motivate us to do anything virtuous. But yeah, some of them can be there even when we're doing virtuous things. Okay, so we'll stop there for tonight and let's dedicate. So we got 2 more weeks to go, and I thought that what we could do is something more practical, like looking at how we can start working on reducing the afflictions, because they are the ones that lead to suffering and problems. Now we can work more on increasing the virtuous mental states, because those are the ones that bring happiness now and in the future. So let's just do a mental dedication of the positive energy we have accumulated by coming together with a good motivation, looking at this topic of the mind. It can be a little difficult to understand, but it's really important. So whatever little bit of understanding we get will help us in our practice. So let's share this positive energy with all living beings. May it be a cause for all sentient beings to understand their minds and learn how to improve their minds, have more love and compassion and other positive qualities that are the cause of happiness for themselves and others, and how to have less negative, disturbing states of mind like anger, hatred, greed, and so on, that make them unhappy and also lead to suffering in the world. So it may help all of us and all living beings proceed on this path, getting closer and closer to awakening, the most perfect, beautiful, pure state of mind there is. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Venerable.